Hello, everyone. It's a cliche that one is happy to be here when giving a talk, but especially after all the time in which philosophers have not been able to meet and talk about philosophy in person, I am especially happy to be able to do this with you, and I thank you for coming out. Also, thanks to all of you who are not in person. I hope I can put on a good show for you as well. So right now, everyone should have a copy of the handout. If you do not, I will try to get you one. Yeah. Oh, Mate has them. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mate. And those of you who are watching online, perhaps, I've tried to make this available through a link so you can download a handout and then watch the talk and follow it that way. So this is a paper that I'm writing with my student Jeremiah Coe, my PhD student in Singapore, called Metaethics for Hedonists. And what we argue is that only pleasure has moral value. This is the kind of claim that will support moral theories like hedonic utilitarianism. And what our argument relies on, this is one of the sort of important things we're building in defending hedonism, is a new analysis of moral concepts that's built along the lines of the old moral sense theories of the 1700s and 1800s in Britain. Our argument relies on this analysis. If we use a certain naturalistic interpretation of the analysis, we get a sort of way of picking out what goodness is in the world. And what this says is, what is goodness? What is moral value? We'll use the words goodness and moral value here as equivalent. What is it? Well, it is what would make pleasure accurate for all possible minds. That is a sort of universality that we take morality to have. To get this analysis going, we have to argue against a popular picture of how to do metaethics these days in philosophy, which is that the ethically important properties are those that provide reasons for action. So we'll start there and then build up to the moral sense analysis and the argument for hedonism. That's what the plan of this talk will be. So the first thing I have to do is explain what the problems are with the standard way of doing things, where we take the important ethical concepts to be those that provide reasons for action. If you work in contemporary ethics, metaethics, you've probably run across this approach that takes reasons as the fundamental kind of thing that ethicists are concerned with. You can see it in the work, for example, of Christine Korsgaard and T.M. Scanlon, both of whom are generally aligned with, Korsgaard especially with Kantian views, Scanlon with a broader set of rationalist views that take reasons for action as a very important thing, and that are generally opposed to consequentialist views that take good consequences as the important thing. I think this is a very deep opposition. If you're a hedonist or a consequentialist, this reasons for action view is actually slanting the entire battle in favor of the Kantians. Nevertheless, a lot of our fellow hedonists and consequentialists, most notably Roger Crisp, have suggested, no, consequentialists really should focus more on reasons for action and go away from the traditional moral concepts. Now, a lot of people think traditional moral concepts can be given an analysis in terms of reasons for action, but Crisp thinks actually you can't do that, and the reasons for action are the important ones to focus on. Whereas the moral stuff, what's good, bad, right, wrong, virtuous, vicious, well, he's mostly interested in the right and wrong parts of these, which he sees as connected to Kantian notions of blame and duty that are historically opposed to consequentialism. So he thinks, okay, we need to get away from those and work with other things that are more suited to our theory. That's Crisp's idea. And he actually thinks that reasons for action are the way to go. He wants to go that way, and I think this is a big mistake. And so one of the first things that my student and I are doing in this paper is saying, no, don't do that. You're going to make the Kantians win even more. So I'll tell you why that happens, why that is. We can see this by going into the metaphysics of reasons for action, by basically trying to understand them ontologically. What sort of things are reasons for action? Well, the ontological treatments they're usually given are of one of two kinds, at least by those who want to give them a central role in ethics. One option is to go broadly Platonist, and this is the way that Scanlon, Michael Huemer, David Enoch at some level do. Enoch actually says, I think he has some kind of line, and this is the way Enoch writes, where he says, "I will not be offended if you call me a Platonist." And yeah, and that's what his view is. There are these, non-natural abstract properties of giving us reasons to do things, and when we deliberate about the right action, well, we get the right answer about which action is right if we mentally arrive at something that there is, in fact, one of these non-natural reasons to do. What do I mean by non-natural? Well, this is to try to indicate something that classic Platonic views ascribe to properties of this kind. They are not properties of the natural world. They are not physical. You can't sense them. They aren't constituted by sensation. They're just another thing entirely. And this is the way that people, including Michael Huemer, David Enoch, T.M. Scanlon, a lot of contemporary non-naturalist realists, this is just how they see reasons for action. There's another option that is more deflationary, that is also fairly popular. And this comes from Christine Korsgaard. That's the person from whom Crisp gets this conception. And Crisp rather likes that because he does not favor the full ontologically robust Platonist conception of reasons for actions. He has enough naturalism in him that he won't go for that and wants something more deflationary. So he moves more towards Korsgaard's option. If you like non-cognitivist views of morality, those are more in the direction we're suggesting here with Korsgaard, where there really is no such thing as wrongness, but our judgments that things are wrong, we're not trying to describe such a thing, the non-cognitivist says. The non-cognitivist says, we were just, the classic old-fashioned non-cognitivist just said, this is a way of saying boo to an action, a way of just expressing a negative emotional reaction to it, rather than a belief or some other mental state that is supposed to be true or accurate. They just said, that's all you're doing. You're expressing these attitudes. And while Korsgaard, it's not exactly clear how to metaethically characterize her within traditional characterizations, some non-cognitivists have said, yeah, Korsgaard, you're doing the kind of thing we're doing when you talk about expressions of rational endorsement, endorsing a certain course of action as the right one to do. But Korsgaard does not see these as fully descriptive. She sees them as doing something else. That's why non-cognitivists like this. You can understand the deflationary treatment, which Crisp gets from Korsgaard, as, if you like non-cognitivism, it's that kind of thing. This idea that we are simply expressing certain attitudes in a non-descriptive way. We don't need real things in the world to be what we're describing. That isn't required. We can just go on doing this no matter what the ontology of the world is like. That deflationist treatment of reasons is also another popular one. Now, these seem like two very different treatments. Platonism, there are these robust, abstract things that are made of stuff that goes beyond the natural world. And so that's one. And deflationary, they're nothing at all, and all we're doing is booing and hooray or whatever. Those are, very different treatments, but they have something important in common. And they have something important in common that's going to frustrate hedonists in particular. Either way, reasons are nothing like pleasure. They're just a completely different sort of thing. Either an abstract thing that is Platonic and non-natural, unlike pleasure, which is just a part of experience, or they're deflated into nothing, and pleasure is not nothing. So no matter what you do with reasons for action, all the standard treatments that there are just going to give them a metaphysics that is just so different from pleasure that you can't build ambitious metaphysical arguments connecting pleasure with reasons for action. The attempt to do so will just be frustrated by their own ontology. Now, you might think, okay, you're asking too much, Neil. You shouldn't expect the metaphysical furniture of moral properties to do that much work in guiding ethical theory. But what I'll tell you is Kantians are doing that work with these properties understood in their preferred way. What they can do is identify, in some cases, reasons for action with deontological moral properties. And this is what the greatest opponent of consequentialist and hedonism and the inventor of this entire strategy himself, Immanuel Kant, was doing. if you can identify making right judgments of reasons with autonomy, then you're setting up things perfectly for course guard. Because then, what is autonomy? Well, it's just making this pattern of judgments of reasons for action. You can identify reasons for action with what the autonomous agent would choose. You can connect reasons to heavyweight moral concepts like autonomy and build them into your theory. The sort of identities that you can create between reasons for action and properties of deontological interest. You can create those identities and do the heavy lifting to bring the properties of deontological interest into your metaethical theory very strongly. And this is what we see Immanuel Kant as doing with this reasons framework. So, he has a different ontology of reasons for action that connects to his amazing views about the nature of the self as a citizen of the noumenal world and not as a citizen of the sensible world and all that stuff. So, if you go Kant's way, you're basically setting yourself up to go into a debate where hedonism and consequentialism are going to have a lot of problems connecting themselves up with the sorts of moral properties or the sorts of ethical properties we're interested in here. And this is why I think, this is what Crisp is doing seems to me like that bad positional move you might make in the opening of a chess game that, now I put this piece here and, it can't go anywhere and my opponent's going to attack me and I can't launch an attack and I'm just stuck. That's basically what we think that Crisp's suggested move will do to the hedonist and consequentialist position. And we're saying, no, don't do that. Do something else. Here's another problem, more generally for consequentialists than hedonists. What do reasons for action apply to? Well, they apply to action. And who likes moral properties applying directly to action the best? Well, this is what deontologists like. They see moral properties as telling you to do things directly influencing action itself without a prior grounding in the states of affairs or events that result from them. So, if an action is a lie or the breaking of a promise, Kant will tell you, don't do it, no matter what pleasure will result for everyone. As a result, this is the famous murderer at the door case, where Kant will allow the murderer at his door to come in and kill people rather than telling the murderer a lie that will make the murderer go somewhere else. So because of things like that, if you get these properties that apply directly to action, don't require prior grounding in states of affairs, you're setting up metaethics in a way where Kantians are in great position to win. They can still mess it up somehow, but go ahead. This is the bad opening move. So what we need to do if you're a consequentialist or hedonist is make a different opening move. Set things up so the properties of ethical interest are not the ones that give the deontologists such natural advantages. Now, since Crisp has made that move, he's now playing the game from, I think, a losing position. And here's what he's doing to try to defend his view, which is a view I like. He is one of our fellow hedonists and consequentialists, so I would like his arguments to succeed here, but I don't think that this can work. He thinks that substantive ethical intuition can reveal the truth of hedonism. When we rightly consider possibilities, the ones that will look like the ones where we have reason to act are the ones where action creates pleasure a certain way. He's not a full-blown utilitarian. He has some distributive concessions to people who want to distribute things in a way that maybe Rawlsians or other such people who want to distribute things to those who are the worst off and so on. This seems fine broadly to us. I'm actually a utilitarian, but if you distribute things more to the worst off, I usually don't complain. In any case, whatever he's doing, the idea, he's still a hedonist, and you're not going to get from intuition such strong support for hedonism because human moral intuition is an unclear mess, as I see it. There are all manner of different intuitions that people have, some which favor hedonism, but some that favor, say, retributivist views of punishment. And I cannot see any well-unified way to just rule out a whole class these intuitions that go against hedonism, as we can see why these are mistaken, or I can't see a way to just by working with the intuitions and saying, well, we have the most in favor of hedonism and the least in favor of these other things, or there's some way we can debunk all the others. It's hard to give arguments like that. Now, there may be some way to do it. Actually, there are some general ways I think you might be able to do it, where you say, for example, everything else apart from hedonism that has given us a belief about morality has come from just taking our emotional responses to tell us what the moral properties are like. For example, I feel guilty about having done this action, so it seems to me this action is wrong. Now, if you take all the things where we have a feeling and then look at the thing the feeling is about and identify that as a moral property, as a rightness or a wrongness. We feel proud, and so we think we did something right. We feel guilty, we think we did something wrong. We hope for a better state of affairs, and then it looks good to us. We admire a certain person, and that person looks virtuous. We feel contempt for a certain person, and that person looks vicious to us. If you cut all that off from ethics and just say, okay, for some reason, our emotions are not showing us the truth about these things. They're actually misleading us completely. The only way we can get the truth is to use a different process entirely. Here's an example. This is an argument that I've made in a paper called The Epistemic Argument for Hedonism. It is unpublished, but the community of high school debaters has really taken to it, and now they use it to defend utilitarianism, because it's up on the web and they're using this all over the place. So that's kind of nice. Though the paper is much too complicated to be a single paper, I'm trying to turn it into a book now. The thing that's the thing you can do that I'm suggesting in that paper is forget trying to read the objective moral properties off of your emotions. Instead, try to discover them using a process that we usually use for non-moral things. The process that lets us know what our experiences are like at the moment we have them. This is something you can do, phenomenal introspection. Right now you have many experiences, sight experiences, sound experiences. They have made a nice room so they're not bad smell experiences. So you have various experiences, and you can tell which experiences you are having right now. You can tell what they're like. I think that's actually a way to know that pleasure is good. Because when you have a pleasure experience, it just feels good to you. And when you have a displeasure experience, it feels bad to you. Just like, when you have a yellow experience, it feels bright. And when you have a maybe navy blue experience, it feels less bright. And you can tell these internal facts about your experiences nicely, reliably. I think you can do that with pleasure too, and discover that pleasure is good. That, I think, is a way you could do it, but this is not the way CRISP wants to proceed. CRISP wants to proceed in the general way that most normative ethicists proceed, which is roughly thinking you can intuit ethical truths, and he sees these as the truths about reasons. This is, as I said, a pretty standard view in contemporary normative ethics. We think it's very dangerous to hedonists because the intuitions you come up with get you a bunch of anti-hedonist intuitions as well, retributivist ones in favor of certain highly specific arrangements of legal relations and property rights, etc. People have all kinds of complex, messy moral intuitions, ethical intuitions of all kinds in these areas. And we don't think that an elegant theory like hedonism that just has one good, pleasure, such an elegant theory cannot be supported by this murky and messy data. If our intuition about what's right and wrong was really unified, then we could do it that way. We could just say, look, we have our intuitions fall into this beautiful pattern that shows us only pleasure can be good. That's the only way to make sense of any substantial number of them. But no, in fact, we can't say that because, hey, our intuitions are kind of a mess, and this is what we see among people. So this is why I don't think that CRISP will be able to succeed with this strategy, and it's all he has left once he has given up on being able to give ambitious metaphysical arguments. So that's why we suggest that hedonists and consequentialists instead use this moral sense analysis. So this picks up on the thing I was telling you about how our feelings make us see moral stuff in the world a certain way. And it concedes a lot at the level of conceptual analysis to that view. It says, well, you know, what you're going to see as good is what gives you feelings like hope. If you hope for a certain future outcome, perhaps if there is war and you hope for peace, then peace looks good to you. If war looks bad to you and peace looks good to you, well, you know, peace, you know, looks better than war, and the way that these things will look is given by, for example, the phenomenology of hope for peace and perhaps horror or sorrow at war. When we judge right and wrong, similar things happen. You know, you are proud of certain actions, and this feeling of pride makes those actions to you look very nice. Whereas actions you are guilty about, you feel guilty about, you know, those actions do not look so nice. And what makes you certain things look nice, the element of your feeling that is doing that, I think, is the pleasure. Pleasure is an important part of pride and hope. And displeasure is an important part of sadness and horror and guilt. It turns out the feelings where we see positively valenced moral properties, the good, the right, the virtuous, these tend to be pleasant. For example, to go to virtue, the feeling of admiration, this is when someone seems to have virtuous character. You admire them and you feel admiration, and that's usually a pleasant feeling. There's also, well, feelings in the other direction, unpleasant feelings, when you consider somebody who did, you know, who has some kind of awful character in some sort of way that you might regard with contempt or hatred, an unpleasant emotion. It's not pleasant to feel those. Now, of course, our moral judgments are complicated, and there are some situations where, say, if I, you know, admire somebody great and think, oh, what a great person, and then I think of myself and I think I fall so short of that person, and then I have a negative judgment about myself and a positive judgment about the hero, you know, this actually shows how this moral sense analysis works, because I'm judging the hero as better and myself as worse, and I'm displeased with myself and pleased with the hero. So everything just seems to work out very nicely with where I am pleased, I am seeing, you know, perceptually something good or right or virtuous, and where I am displeased, what I am seeing, or at least the way it looks to me, is that something is bad or wrong or vicious. So this is this connection between the pleasure of the feeling you have and how it makes the world look to you. And I think pleasure does this. So in my previous book that Mate mentioned, Human Nature, this analysis is sort of a simplified version of an analysis I present there. I sort of overcomplicated it there in some ways, but this has simplified it down to just pleasure. I was trying to put hope and guilt and all these feelings into the analysis before, and that it just, it was confusing, I'll say that, and it just made all the ones come out different. But since pleasure and displeasure are the unifying things that just, you know, they're the ingredient that I think makes all these emotions of guilt and hope and so on what they are. If you took the pleasure out of hope, if you took the pleasure out of admiration, out of pride, I don't think they would be hope and pride and admiration anymore. You know, that's an essential ingredient in what they are. You would not feel hedonically the same way, and they would just be different feelings. I would not consider them the same emotion. So I think it really is the pleasure that is doing all the work here in sort of representing value of certain kinds. Without the pleasure in there, it would not be a perception of value as such. Think, you know, if you took the displeasure out of horror, it would just be being a little bit, you know, agitated maybe? I don't know. You know, or I don't know what it would be. But there would be so much little left in it that it would not be horror anymore. So that's why I'm taking pleasure to be the central element here. Now, these are not full analyses, and I should say a couple things about how you can treat this analysis. Now, one thing you'll notice about this analysis, if you're a good, solid analytic philosopher looking at definitions, you'll notice that should is in all of these. And then you'll think, okay, are you falling back on some notion of should? We'll want to analyze that. That's a normative concept, obviously. And yes, the reason I'm leaving should unanalyzed in what I have here, and you could develop it further. There are 5 ways in particular that I can see for people to develop should, and each one of these corresponds to a traditional metaethical view. Alan Gibbard has said this very nicely, that you can understand a lot of traditional metaethical views as giving their own analysis of should applied to a certain attitude. So here's what Gibbard says about should. So suppose you are, for example, a non-naturalist realist. You have the Platonist position that I described before. What are good, bad, right, and wrong? Well, they are all relations to some non-natural property that the people like Plato are interested in. How will you understand should? Well, the way you will understand should then is as a descriptive claim that there is a non-natural property of, I guess, making pleasure accurate attached to whatever event you think everyone should be pleased about. So just to give you an example of what this looks like, let me take wrong here. So suppose if you're a non-naturalist with should, you think that wrong actions have a certain property that makes displeasure accurate. People should be displeased and feel anger or guilt, depending on whether they or somebody else did the wrong action. They should have one of those feelings about it. Why should they have that feeling? Well, because that action has a non-natural property that makes that feeling accurate. That's what should means to you if you're a non-naturalist. There is a property of this thing, a non-natural property, or at least you could, I don't want to get too picky about the metaphysics, you can say a non-natural relation between the agent of the property, do it however you like. But there's something non-natural there that metaphysically underwrites the accuracy of the pleasure, or makes the pleasure what you should feel, something like that. It's just, that should is made true by the instantiation of a non-natural property. Now, if you're a non-cognitivist, who we've discussed before, rather than going the non-naturalist way where there's a property, all these shoulds do is they're just expressions of some booing or hurraying, or if you're a more complicated non-cognitivist, put in your favorite complicated attitude. They're expressions of some attitude like that. If you're an error theorist about morality, you will probably agree with the non-naturalist about should and what it's describing. But what you will say is, unfortunately, we're in a non-natural ontology in this world. This is, or in maybe in all possible worlds, you could say, there are just no non-natural properties. So while should describe some, it's a false description. It could only be a false description. And that's why all our claims about good, right, virtue, bad, wrong, and vice are false. And this is what you get from John Mackey and all the classic error theorists. I think Nietzsche had this view, that you could not find moral properties in the world because natural reality does not have the non-natural properties that we are talking about when we say that things are morally right, wrong, and so on. You could be a constructivist of a certain sort, a relativist or a subjectivist, and say that the should, really, when we say everyone should be pleased about, we don't mean everyone, we just mean our culture or our society, or even, if you want to be a very strict subjectivist, oneself. So you can build relativist views that just set it up so that, the should just picks out a certain community or group. So there's a lot of options here. We will not suggest any of those. What we will suggest is a naturalistic realist version of this. And what is the should there? Well, should has to pick out some natural relation in the world, something that doesn't involve any of those abstract properties, anything like that. We want to work with the world as our senses and science present it to us. That's what naturalists want to do, and that's what we want to do. And we will find you goodness in such a world. So that is why we're naturalistic realists as opposed to anti-realists. So here's what we suggest. Understand should as an accuracy relation. Now, what do we mean by this? So what is accuracy? So accuracy, truth would be something that philosophers work with more. The reason we say accuracy is that we want something that applies to sensation and experience rather than belief. And saying that feelings are true or that sensations are true is not usually the way we talk. There may be a deep reason for this. beliefs can be true or false by being, they can be false if they're a little bit mistaken, but for accuracy, we often want similarity. So things don't have to be perfectly, exactly matching in some contexts to be accurate. That's something that often happens with sensation. I actually have slightly bad color vision. I cannot see green as well as some other people can, and it fades into brown. But I can still get a somewhat accurate visual experience of some things, and it just depends on how much accuracy, is demanded, where we want to set the thresholds and the standards. So accuracy is a degreed notion, and that's actually very nice for the way I understand good, right, and virtue, and so on. I'm also a defender of scalar consequentialism, the view that things can be more right or less right, more wrong and less wrong. And the last time I came to Croatia, I got a great philosophical gift from Mate and Tomislav, who showed me that the Croatian language has comparative and superlative terms for right and wrong. And that was amazing to me because consequentialists we love this. It's not just, right and wrong the way the Kantians have it with their very absolute distinction between moral right and wrong. Hey, consequences can be a little bit better, a little bit worse, and so on. And so if you have comparative terms, right or wrong, I think is Predavanje, is that one of the terms? Is Predavanje. Yeah. If you have terms like that that can get the comparative and superlative forms on there, that works very well for consequentialists because, states of affairs, events, they can have a little degree more pleasure, less pleasure. Those degrees are there in the states of affairs, and we can now, with the help of Croatia, put them into the terms themselves. English does not like this because righter and wronger, rightest and wrongest are not terms of English, but you can get these little varied things here. And pleasure, which is what is going to give these feelings their sort of moral character, it has degrees too. You can have a little bit more pleasure, a little bit less pleasure. So all of this is flowing very nicely. Right. So we want that notion of accuracy that picks up that slight difference. You can have more or less, rather than an absolute binary notion. You can have degrees. We would like that one. Where do we see naturalistic accuracy? What is an example of it in the world? Well, color experiences, just sensation generally, can be evaluated for accuracy. If you are looking at me and you see me as having long blonde hair, something is wrong with your vision. Your vision is not accurate. That is how we talk about accuracy. But if you see me as having black hair, your vision is accurate. Then that's the kind of thing it is. And one thing we know about accuracy, it doesn't, at least on standard views, require anything non-natural. You do not need Plato's special properties to make, vision work, for vision to be accurate. Usually what we say is there's some way of understanding how the experience is representing natural reality, my hair. Your experience of black represents this, and if the way your experience represents it is similar enough to the way it actually is, your experience is accurate. All you need is the representation, which can be naturalistically treated, and the reality, which is just some hair. It's not a non-natural property. You could use a razor on this, but you don't need to use Occam's razor. So because of that, naturalists are fine with this notion of accuracy. It just doesn't require anything that is inimicable or otherwise, hostile to their theory. So what we would need to really solidify this kind of view psychologically is some kind of argument that pleasure and displeasure play the relevant roles in belief formation and concept acquisition that things that have this sort of accuracy can do. And we think that the psychological evidence actually supports this. So this is shown by some very interesting experiments where if you for example, if you give people questionnaires where they're looking at the questionnaire and saying, okay, was this action right or wrong? And they're rating it on a scale of 1 to 7. Simone Schnall did these experiments where she put people into different rooms, and in some rooms, so she went to this store that sells various silly things and bought fart spray. So it smelled like somebody farted in the room, and she sprayed it into some of the rooms where people were taking their questionnaires. Now, the bad smell, it turned out, reduced their evaluations of the action, so they judged the action to be more wrong because of the bad smell. What is this showing? Well, what we think it shows is that displeasure actually has an effect on moral belief formation. Just as a yellow color in the room would make people think things are more yellow, a bad smell in the room, when you put in displeasure, people just judge things to be more wrong because some displeasure, which is this key element there, is supplied. And then they start judging things wrong because, hey, that's just like the color. It's just, you flood experience with that, and people get slightly wrong beliefs about the world, just as they would if you mess with their experiences. This is just experience to belief. Belief formation is the simplest kind of belief formation there is, as far as like what humans do and what we do from being little babies. We form beliefs about the world based on experience, and we can reduce moral belief formation to that with the help of these experiments. Another experiment by, this is Goodwin's experiment, they printed the questionnaires, some of them very nicely, like the nice handout that you have all printed up here, but some of the questionnaires were printed very badly in very hard to read typography. And so people were very frustrated reading them, and the people rating things that were hard to read judged the actions as worse because they were just frustrated with the questions, and that just put them in a negative, emotional mood, and now they're just, bad. So that's what they were doing. So this suggests that really this displeasure is playing the role in shaping belief that is, suggested here. Jonathan Haidt has these cases where he puts something disgusting in a moral example, puts incest or something like that into an example, and then people, so wrong. And then, even though people can't explain why their judgments are being moved, the disgusting things in the example are pushing them in a way that they don't think is the way things are actually working. So that's on belief formation. On concept acquisition, this is where Hare's work with psychopaths comes up. Oh gosh, I really do want to read you this quote. I need to go fast, but this quote is just something that I cannot leave you without. This is a psychologist named Hare. This is not the ethicist R.M. Hare, but this psychologist goes into prisons and interviews psychopaths. And some of them say truly extraordinary things that display a very strange level of grasp of moral concepts, a interesting failure to grasp them. So let me find the comment this one psychopath made to Dr. Hare, and it is, let me quote this. So the psychopath is talking about his mother, and he describes his mother as the most beautiful person in the world. She was strong, worked hard to take care of 4 kids. A beautiful person. I started stealing her jewelry when I was in the 5th grade. I never really knew the bitch. We went our separate ways. So that's your psychopath who goes from calling his mother a beautiful person to bitch. What is this? Here's what I think is happening here. The psychopath, this is what they've found empirically about them, they just don't have moral feelings and emotions in the same way the rest of us do. That's why they commit so many crimes. The feeling of guilt, the feeling of like, oh no, if I did that, that would be the wrong thing. That sort of feeling like if you were going to steal something or tell a lie, oh, no, yuck, that's not the kind of action I do. They don't have that because they don't have the right feeling. So they just do all the bad things. And then when they describe things, they describe them in ways that you would not say if you had the feelings. I mean, for the same way you would not describe a color as bluish orange, because those are just 2 different colors. What is bluish orange? Yellow orange I understand, but bluish orange? Or purplish yellow? What would those be? Okay, the way the psychopath is talking, using beautiful person and bitch, that seems to be the same kind of thing. That's what happens when, somebody does not have the right feelings and they cannot get the concepts right. That's how it would be for color. You can see the moral equivalent of it. So right now, everything is lining up psychologically in a way where the moral feelings will give, or these feelings, these pleasant and unpleasant feelings, will give us sort of a certain kind of content that plays the belief forming, concept acquiring roles that we see in color experience. Everything is lining up for it to have that content. And that is what naturalists need to say, okay, there's an accuracy condition here, because that's what we do for color. The psychological role of your color experiences in belief formation and concept acquisition supports a naturalistic argument that they have a certain content or a certain set of accuracy conditions, that something makes them right. And, that's all lining up with morality empirically. And this is what I've argued in Humean nature. There's a lot more in Humean nature. I'm defending a Humean theory of motivation as well, but this is the sort of positive story about moral concepts that I built in to the book after a very good ethicist named Mark Van Rooyen, who teaches at the University of Nebraska, basically said, Neil, you've built a great theory of motivation, or at least a plausible one, which is actually plausible is more like what Van Rooyen would say. He's not one to fling around superlatives, but he said, you've done something pretty plausible here. Okay, but what is going to happen to morality once you do that? And so I was like, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. So I put that in. And here's some more of what's going to happen. You're going to get a great argument for hedonism, and I want to show it to you now. Okay, so suppose we have goodness understood as what would make pleasure accurate, and since we're naturalists, we'll have to get a fully naturalistic story about what such accuracy is. We'll have to sort of build it up from naturalistic stuff that, pleasure can be accurate, and that's what some of the psychological work that I was talking about before helps us do. It's doing, pleasure is just doing the thing in the mind that a representer of moral properties would do. It's shaping your moral beliefs. It's causing you to acquire moral concepts. Okay, well, if that's going on, then it probably is the kind of thing that would be made accurate by the instantiation of a moral property, because that's just what the properties that are about things tend to do in the mind. So we have a good naturalistic reason from experiments and what we've observed the concept doing to see that goodness is what would make it accurate. That's what it causes us to form beliefs about. Now, the next thing that I will add on here that I have not gone into is universality. And the big claim of this argument is that hedonism alone can give you a universal morality. So let me explain what universality is here. It's pretty simple the way I formulate it. Goodness is the same for all possible minds. And what I mean by this is that the way the relativist wants things to be, where there's a good for you, good for me, good for Californians, good for Klingons, good for whatever beings might inhabit the universe, all these different goods, these will not be the genuine moral good. I mean, the genuine moral good might stand in some relation in some way to various things. Of course, all kinds of things stand in relations to all kinds of things, but the good will not be constituted by some relation specifically to my mind and not to the minds of others. That's not what the nature of goodness is going to be found in. It'll have to have some kind of universal nature that makes all possible minds' judgments about it true and false in response to the same thing. You must all be talking about one and the same thing for it to be genuine moral goodness. I think there are a lot of values that are not this way. So etiquette is not this way. Customs differ around the world. Fashion is not this way. Different cultures have different fashion norms. And I think the truths about fashion in different cultures are different. The clothes that are fashionable in Singapore and the clothes that are fashionable in ancient Rome are very different. So that's what's going to it's going to be that way. However, morality, I think, is not supposed to be that way. That's a distinctive thing about morality as opposed to other things. And there are a lot of arguments to establish this in metaethics, even though they don't all talk about universality as such. I like Stevenson's responses to the relativists, especially, because what Charles Stevenson shows is that if you have two relativists, this is back from the 30s, it's sort of a classic argument against relativism. If, suppose, Xi Jinping in China says, democracy is not good, and Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan says, democracy is good. Well, suppose you understand this in a relativist way, where Xi Jinping is saying, democracy is not good according to the values of the People's Republic of China. And Tsai Ing-wen, president of Taiwan, is saying, democracy is good according to the values of the Taiwanese political community. Well, they're talking about according to the views of two different things. not the same thing. This is not a disagreement about a unified thing. It isn't real substantive disagreement of the usual sort we have. It's more like, oh, you like this food, I like this food. And what we're talking about is the relations between these different foods and our different attitudes of liking, since we're different people. What universality says is that morality will not be like that. And that kind of rules out relativism. And I think that's actually a result we want. Relativism is okay for other kinds of values. But the interesting thing about morality, and what makes it so hard to be a moral realist, is how are you going to naturalistically find a universal value? And that is what we need to do if we are going to go forward with this argument. So let's go a little bit further into universality and see what you would do to get a universal ethics, which here, since we've accepted this naturalistic version of the moral sense theory, what we have here is goodness makes pleasure accurate in a naturalistically determined way. So we came out with from the moral sense theory, which gave you the pleasure bit, and the naturalistically determined way, well, that was when we added this when we gave you the naturalistic interpretation of that analysis. So that's what we're looking for, and we need that to be the same in all possible minds. So what is goodness then? Well, what would make pleasure accurate for all possible minds in a naturalistically determined way? So we need to find an accuracy condition for pleasure that comes out the same no matter which mind the pleasure is in. And remember here, if we say something like, what makes the pleasure accurate is what caused it, that will not do. Because what causes pleasure in two different minds, well, it could have two different causes. So that will not work. What relations can we use that will give you the same result in all possible minds? Now, the non-naturalists, they have a solution. They just invent some non-natural relation. They just say, suppose you're the non-naturalist Muslim, and you think eating pork is wrong. Well, you'll just say, okay, well, there's a non-natural property of wrongness stuck in the pork, kind of like a barbecue skewer, just except leading up to Plato's heaven rather than the barbecue. So yeah, that just leads up to there, and that's what's in it. That's what the ontology of wrongness is, and that's there. But of course, we can't do this. We're naturalists. We need to find a good naturalistic relation. No non-natural properties allowed, only things allowed that we've seen in the sciences or with our own senses or some other empiricist-friendly way like that. That's what I build with. So I need to find a universal accuracy condition. And since it has to extend to all possible minds, it can't pick up different things depending on contingent things standing outside the mind. What can I do? Well, the solution, as I see it, is offered by empathy. Because there's a very interesting thing about empathic experience that just makes it unique in the world of things that represent things, or maybe not totally unique, obviously not totally unique because I'm saying that morality is like it, but very unusual, certainly. So think about this fact about empathy. Suppose you see your friend and you empathize with your friend and you feel sad for your friend. Maybe this would be if you see your friend crying or something like this. How are you representing your friend's feelings? Well, you're representing your friend as being sad, as feeling sad. Why is your representation one that your friend is sad? Well, what makes it a representation of your friend as sad is that the empathic experience you are having in yourself in simulating the other person is an experience of sadness. Or it has that phenomenology, it has that character. With empathy, the phenomenal character that we have in our empathic experiences represents reality as matching them, as identical in experience with them. If you empathize and feel sad, you represent whoever you're empathizing with as sad. If you empathize and feel happy, you represent whoever you're empathizing with as happy. And suppose you've empathized with your friend who you feel sad for, but as it turns out, your friend was like this, it was just, you could not see your friend correctly, your friend was actually very happy. Well, in that case, you have misrepresented how your friend felt with empathy. So this is just showing the power of this identity-accuracy relation. Correct representation, explained by this identity thing. Incorrect representation, explained by a failure of identity. That's, how we would expect things to go if this is really the accuracy condition for empathy, and it is. Now, here's a really nice thing about empathy for our purposes here. It upholds universality. Because no contingencies outside the pleasure can come in and disrupt that identity. No matter what you put beside pleasure, it's still pleasure. Whatever caused the pleasure, well, assuming that we can get a sufficiently unified view of pleasure, and this is how we see pleasure. It's just an experience, a feeling. It's a dimension of experience. So as it turns out, obviously some pleasures feel different from others in other ways. Pleasure of good food might have a spatial location, but the pleasure of knowing you will get a promotion doesn't really have a bodily spatial location. Okay, that's true. There's differences like that, but they all feel good at some level. That's sort of a phenomenological thing that they all have in common, and that's how we identify them as pleasure here. They're just all good feelings in some way. That's what we think pleasure is. It's just this kind of good feeling, and it can be combined with all kinds of other feelings. It can be, you can subtract other feelings from it, but that's just what it is. And we see, maybe there's different things to mix it with, but much like volume for sounds, you can have a lot of very different sounding sounds that have the same volume, and you can have a lot of pleasures that are, some are bodily, some are mental, but they all have the feeling good element. And that's the element that we are using identity with to just pick out, the accuracy condition of pleasure in all these possible worlds for all these possible minds. Now, this does not let any contingencies about what's in the neighborhood of the pleasure get in. It's just the pleasure that determines its accuracy condition. So the accuracy condition will be the same in all possible minds, upholding universality. And what is this accuracy condition? Well, it's determined by identity. Whatever is the same thing as the pleasure is its accuracy condition. That's how empathy works. What makes your sadness accurate is the sadness of your friend, the same feeling. So let's just do that again. Identity for accuracy conditions. What's identical to pleasure? Pleasure. And then, if that's the accuracy condition, by moral sense naturalism, pleasure is goodness, because pleasure has made pleasure accurate in a naturalistically determined way. That's where our conclusion is. If you use identity to determine the accuracy conditions for the thing whose accuracy conditions are goodness, and that thing is pleasure, well, pleasure is identical to pleasure, so pleasure is goodness. And that is why hedonism alone can preserve the universality of morality. I'll leave you with one last thing here. This is just sort of a way to imagine what it is to understand moral value this way. This is sort of just a weird way to visualize it. So this is what it would be like if you saw color the way we think you see the moral truth. Here's what that would be like. Now, color is not really this way. Let me just tell you that first so I don't seem completely insane. I do not think that color is like this, but this is just to get you to see what that would be like. So, for example, my bag here is dark blue. What would it be like for something to be dark blue if the accuracy conditions of your dark blue experience were determined by identity? Here's what it'd be like. As you look at this bag and you have the experience of dark blue, the bag is having its own experiences. And it's the same experience you're having. This surface is just full of little minds having dark blue experiences. And the way you have your dark blue experience is by empathizing with them and sharing the color feeling that is all these little minds have. That's what it would be like if we could see color the way our theory says that we see the moral facts. Now, in fact, we don't see color that way. And color experience does not have universality, as those thought experiments about what if the aliens saw everything inverted, tell us. Inverted spectrum cases actually, tell us no, color isn't really that way. It shouldn't be that way. It doesn't need to be that way. But morality does. morality is universal. And what we claim here is that we have found the one naturalistic way to make morality come out properly universal, and it leads us to hedonism. Thanks.